Hi friends, welcome back to Mule 4 series of learning videos. I am siva.thankamanee, an integration technical architect. It's been quite some time after we saw any use case about batch processing, and many of our friends requested me to come up with a video fresh discussing in details about batch processing and design techniques and design and implementation techniques in a separate video. And they have also requested me to go through designing the components one by one as I go, because earlier in the videos I was going through the ones that were already designed and I was just explaining the components. So based on the request, I thought I can come up with a full-fledged batch processing use case, design it and implement it and give a demo so that many viewers can benefit by looking at it and understand the intricacies of the design and how the batch processing works and how we can design the error handling technique. Let's get started. So let's see how batch processing works in Mule 4 in general. So we get the input either in the form of a file or in the form of a request through REST service or FTP, or in some manner we receive a bunch of inputs. And in this concept, we are not going to see how we can process 1 GB or 5 GB files, and there is a separate video I published, you can refer that. But once we have a reasonable number of records, say like 1,000 records, which doesn't lead to memory issues. So once we get that somehow, either in the form of a file or FTP or via JSON or XML, in whatever form, we tend to process this one by one and then meet the use case. So normally how it works is we don't, when we receive 1,000 records, it doesn't get feasible to process all the 1,000 records at once. So what we do is we go in batches, like we take records in batches like 100 by 100 or 10 by 10 or 5 by 5 and then process it. So that's the basic concept about batch processing technique. So let's see how each batch works. So we have seen about how the batch processing works as a whole. But in one single batch, let's see. So when we have thousands of records, we select reasonable batch size. Say, for example, we tend to choose 10 records in a single batch. So how it works is it iterates 10 by 10. So 10 records are handled at a time. So in a single batch. So it doesn't process as a whole, but the loop iterates like one by one. It handles every record individually. So that's how a single batch works. And then there is a concept called aggregation. So after processing individual records, you can either treat them individually, or within that single batch you can group them based on the record use case. For example, you take 10 records from 1,000 records, and then while you process 10 records, you don't want to handle 10 as a 10 record set, but instead you want to handle in two different aggregation, like you are grouping 5 records each and then processing. So we will dive into those details while we see those demo. First, let's see what the use case that we are going to handle. So we have an online order processing and all the order details are coming, or you get the purchase order details from the vendor, and you are hosting the e-commerce website. So e-commerce website should read all these data and process the orders for fulfillment. So while receiving the order, we have a serial number, order ID, SKU, quantity, price, and customer ID. So these are the details that we have just taken for demo purpose. And actual orders might have hundreds of fields. It's not so easy like this. So we are just taking and focusing on how to demo the batch processing. So we are going to make little spice it up, because we don't want to deal with that so easy use case. But if you look at it, we have order entries together. Say for example, you have 5 items ordered in order ID 1000, And you have order ID 1005. We have 4 records. Each record bears the item and the quantity separately. And for simplicity, I have given customer ID because I don't want to replicate. So just focus on the order ID. And we have certain orders contains multiple entries. So this is what we have taken. So what we are going to do is we are not just going to randomly take those individual records and process, but we are going to process them meaningfully. So we are going to take logical order. So every entry, so this all the 5 entries together is a single record. That's how we are going to treat, because all these are related records based on the order ID. So that's what we are going to handle as a single meaningful entity. Now let's start with the demo. And before you start any project, first you need to retrieve the payload and set up the flow just to replicate the payload, and then you can start complex development process. So that will give you some idea. For example, setting the metadata and everything will give you more confidence, and then it will give you tooltip while you are developing the individual components like database insertion or transformation, etc. So first what we will do is we are going to set up a metadata. So first let's choose file on new or updated file. Let's choose, because we need to take this as an event processor. So this will the triggering of event will be just placing the file into the folder. But instead you can, if you are hosting it in the Cloud Hub, you can use FTP instead of file. So then we will go with the metadata configuration. So I have the details available under this folder. Under the demo we have order. So let's set it up. Let's just go to the advanced metadata and add metadata. Let's add it. Let's add order. So it's loaded. So now we are going to choose CSV as a type. So because in many videos we have seen JSON and XML, I thought we can give CSV here. So now let's load from example, and let's load it. So this is the place where the order is available. I'm just loading it. So this is the configuration preview. You get it properly and say OK, and everything looks good. Select it. So once you select, Mule 4 loads this metadata, and which will be helpful throughout your processing, which we are going to see. And so we are going to write a small transformation before you display the payload. So what we are going to do is we are going to group these records based on the order ID. That's what we are going to see. So let's see how to do that. And we'll say payload group by. So this is the advantage. Whenever you type $dot and you see all the fields, that's the advantage of metadata. So we will group it using order ID, and so we need to plug by dollar, not by the key, because dollar is the value. So we want all the values based on the order ID. So let's see how this works. Let's configure the file. So we need to take the data from this input folder. So I'm going to configure this connector configuration. So file, and the directory is here. We need to use either / or / twice. You need to escape it. And that's it. This is where the data is read from. And then you can choose auto delete to true, just for the simplicity. Otherwise it will keep processing again and again. So that's it. So scheduling strategy, we can say fixed frequency, and we will throw it as once in 5 seconds. Let's save this and then run it. So the application is now started up. So we will do just a couple of more things just for clarity. And we will go here to MIME type, and then we will choose application CSV, because while reading it comes in the form of binary, and then unless we specify the specific MIME type, it doesn't know, so we need to mention this. And we have transformed the payload into array of orders. So every record will contain group of order entries. So that's what we have done. And since it's a file based one, we need to have some logger instead of, because we cannot run this in Postman or SOAP UI tool. So we will log the payload. Let's have the expression payload. Let's save this. So the application is restarted. So we will go to the folder. Let's copy this file and put it into the designated input folder. It's picked up, and let's see how it works. So now we can see here the entries are coming as an array of records. So each entry is an array which contains all these combined orders. Let us show. Let's see this together. Let me copy that into the pad. Let's copy this. So this is one order. Let's minimize this. So let's see. So all these orders are 1009, and here the next record starts with the open square bracket. So each square bracket indicates order, so it automatically grouped with the order number, and then this one is grouped as order with 10056. You see here when it ends, it will start with another square bracket. You see here. So they are grouped logically, and then every entry will become one particular order. So this is what we intended to do it. Now let's start with the actual batch processing. So now let's drag and drop batch process. So when you drag and drop batch job, automatically it structures batch step, which contains a processor and aggregator, and on complete. We are going to see how to use these logical sections one by one. So first, as we have seen, we need to see how from the total number of records, what is the batch size that we are going to choose. So one single batch should be, say, 4 records, let's say. So the batch block size decides how many records will together form one particular batch. So we will say 4. So that is the batch block size. And under the batch step, we need to process every order, and then we have created a table called orders. So it contains order ID and items, total number of items in that particular order. That's what we are going to persist for our reference purpose. And also we are many of the friends requested me on how we can leverage this statistics about after completing the batch process, how many passed, how many failed, how to track those. So I thought of showing the demo on how to do this, use these metrics and then put it here. So let's have batch ID, batch date, total records, failed records, and successful records. So we will store for every time when the batch is processed, we will have the batch metrics here. That's what we are going to do. So here automatically the payload starts iterating. You don't need to mention what data need to be iterated, so it will be happening automatically. And then batch step will process each record one by one. Although we call it as batch, please understand that it's not processing together, it's not a magic. So it just iterates through one by one in batch step until one batch is completed. Say here one batch is 4 records, which means 4 orders. It's not 4 records because we already grouped the individual records into orders. So it's like batch block 4 would mean 4 orders. That's what we are going to do here. So first let's display the payload here. So let's log. So let's log the payload here. And once completed, this is when the whole batch job is completed, on complete event will be fired and it will be triggered and executed. So here we will say job completed, batch job completed. And here we are displaying payload, so it will iteratively display each order, and then on complete it will say job is completed. So let's save this and then see what happens. It's restarted. Let's go to this demo, copy this order file, and let's see how many orders are available here. So 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10 and 11. So there are 11 orders available. So it should successfully display 11 if our implementation is correct. Let's put it here. So let's copy this and put it under the input folder. And once it's picked up, it will get removed from here. Yeah, it's removed. Let's go and see. Now you can see different orders are displayed. So you can see different order ID appearing here. And then it should say 11 records. So yeah, you can see here records processed 11, successful records 11, failed records 0. So this is working as expected. And now we are going to see two different concepts. So how to process individually when, I want to show how to process this individually, and then how to process every batch with aggregation, and how to process the metrics after the whole job completed. Let's go one by one. So to show or prove individual records working, then we need to go for database insertion, where you want to store the details about every order here in such a way that you have order ID and total number of items. Let's do that. So let's go with the database and select, we will use insert, and let's go with the database configuration. I'm using local MySQL server, so I'm using MySQL connection, and let's configure the Maven dependency. Let's add it, and host is localhost, port is 3306, root, and password is also root. The database is employee. So let's test the connection to ensure the database is working fine. Its connection is successful. Let's say OK. So So now we need to insert the record. So imagine that the record comes as an array. So we have to do this transformation here. So in this transformation, we can say order ID. Let's say payload of 0 dot order ID. So as and when you manipulate, you get this. So because we want to find out order ID, because order ID is common for all the records, you can take it from first element. And items. So here you have order ID and items. So items will be payload. Let's choose size of payload. So since it's an array, every array is an order, so it will contain a number of entries in the particular order. It will decide how many different items are bought. So that's what we are going to do. So here we are going to insert payload.order.order ID. That's what we are going to do here. So insert into, so here it's orders, and orders contains two things, two entries, elements, order ID and items. So let's go directly to values, colon order ID and items. So these are the two parameters, and here we need to decide those parameters values. So it's like a JSON. So we are going to decide what order ID. You can either give it, we have seen in one of the previous videos, you can give the database parameter name either in double quote or as a field name without double quote. So both are accepted. So here we will say payload of 0 dot order ID and payload dot items. So these are the two fields that are available here, payload dot order ID, payload dot items. That's what we are inserting here. So we need to choose order. I'm sorry about that. So we will choose payload dot order dot order ID, and here payload dot order dot items. Why is it saying? So we have order ID and items. We didn't specify the items. Yeah, there you go. So when everything is correct, it will give the tooltip properly. So that's what I was expecting. Now everything looks okay. So we have introduced the transformation to find out order details, and then that's what we are going to insert it. So it's for every order. So every order will be having a distinct record into the database. That's what we are going to do. Let's save it and then run it now. So since it's a database component newly created and we need to restart the application, I will pause this video and restart, and then I'll show you the demo. Let's stop it and restart. So the application is started up, and let's investigate the content of orders. So it has nothing. So we are going to go to this input folder and copy this order. So there should be 11 orders are there, and 11 entries must be created in the database if everything is correct. So let's go to the input folder. Let's paste it. Got deleted, so it should have been processed without issues now. So I don't see any error. And let's see this. So successful records 11, failed record 0. So let's go back to the database. Let's run it. I think everything looks good. So we have order ID and number of items in that order. So everything looks good so far, so good. So I'm happy it worked out in the first run. So we have, out of these 3 logical sections, we have completed one to show how every order is being inserted into the database. This is close to the actual use case that we will be having in the project. So now what we are going to do is we are going to aggregate and then process it. Say for example, we need to store it, either we can store as an individual order as a file. I mean, we have seen how to store it into the database, but in the aggregator we can use file. We can put it in the file for demo. So let's see how aggregator works. It's very simple. Batch aggregator and then drag and drop. Under the batch aggregator, you decide what aggregator size is. So this logically it makes sense. It must be less than or equal to the batch block size. So for example, it should be something meaningful. If a batch block size is 10, you can have you can split it into 2 and 5 each. Now since we have chosen 4 here, so maybe we can try to aggregate 2 orders in each file. So 2, we are deciding the aggregator size is 2, and then we can put it as a log file first. So let's log the payload. So you can see here the payload in a batch step is having different context of payload in batch aggregator and payload in onComplete event. So payload is contextual, and don't take payload as an input payload. So here the payload would mean one particular order, which means 5 entries of same order ID. That's what would mean payload here. But here payload would mean the aggregated records that contains 2 orders. That's what the payload is here in batch aggregator. But here in the context of onComplete, payload is a batch matrix. That payload will not have any data related to orders. OnComplete will have only metrics which will say total number of passed records, failed records, and total records processed. So payload is contextual. So what you need to do is you need to set the breakpoint and run it in the debug mode and then find out how payload looks like in each of the sections. So now in order to understand the batch aggregator properly, we need to understand what payload goes there before we combine them into a single aggregated records. So here the final outcome is the result of the database operation. So we might not get the actual payload that's going in here. So what we can do is we can store it in a variable. So we can put it in a variable and say order payload, or let's say order details. And it's a payload. And we need to restore this order details after the database insertion is completed. So again, now we need to set payload after this, and the set payload is vars.order details, and MIME type must be JSON. So this will restore the payload after the database insertion. Otherwise you will get the result of the database insertion on successful data entry as an aggregator, which we don't want. So let's save this, and then it's already saved. And let's process this now. So I have slightly changed the structure. Instead of set payload, I have used a transform message. This is because the batch aggregator, when aggregating, it will take the final payload that comes out of this batch step. So after the database insertion, successful database insertion, we are going to restore the order payload by using this data weave. So data weave is simple, that we are taking the variable order details and then restoring the order ID, and in the same way we are restoring the items. So these two are restored, and then that will get aggregated into the batch aggregator. So in order to demo for easy purpose, I am just running as a debugger mode so that you can understand and see how it works. So let's go back and then restore this order again. Let's see, process that. Let's come here, and yeah, it's processing in a debug mode. You can see this is the aggregator. So this aggregates the outcome of what we have processed in the each batch step. So you can see the payload. So payload contains the aggregated order. So you can note down here. So we have taken each order and then we found out the order ID and the number of items, but we have done it only for one item here. If you look at this, if you look at the design, so we have done it only for one order in the transfer message. But what you see here is the aggregated record of two orders. That's what is the purpose, because the size block size is 2 here. So it's each batch entries are collected and aggregated as the size of 2 records. So now we have completed 2 logical blocks. One to understand what's happening in the batch step, and then how each record in a batch step got aggregated. So this is often useful for us, particularly when you are doing the database operation. We can do the batch commit here if you want. So only out of 100 records you want to aggregate 50 records and then only insert those iterated and then put it in the database, you can do so. So there are a lot of use cases in batch aggregator. Instead of processing a single record one by one, you can do that in a batch aggregator, because we can't avoid this individual process step. So you can take the incoming message and you can do the data massaging and then do the calculations. You can call Salesforce, or you can call external web service and do all the data and prepare the canonical form, and only after doing it for say 50 entries together, when you reach the reasonable number of entries, you can post it to the end system or database, etc. So there are a lot of practical use cases where you can think of using batch aggregator. So we have done these two. So now we will see what's happening in the onComplete. So we have seen onComplete is used for storing the metrics. So we have also seen the payload is different in the context of batch step. Payload is here in different in aggregator, which we have seen in the debug mode. Now we are going to see what's happening in the onComplete. So let's toggle the breakpoint, and then we can introduce the breakpoint here and then see what happens. So this will be running for each batch after the aggregated record is reached, but here onComplete will happen only once, that towards the end of the batch job completion. So let's try this and see what happens. Let's complete the current step. Let's complete it all the way. Yes, we have done that. So now let's process it again. Let's come here. So now you can see here let's see the canvas. See, the breakpoint is available in onComplete even. So let's see how the payload looks like. Now you can see here this payload is containing batch job result type. It's not a normal order details that we have seen like a batch aggregator. So this is different. So you can see there are so many variables that are maintained automatically for the metrics purpose. Particularly you can see loaded records 11, and you can see on complete the successful records 11, total records 11, and you should see failed records 0. See here, the failed record is 0. So you can have a lot of other details here, whichever you feel you can take it from this batch job result data type. So what we are going to do is to introduce database insert, and then we are going to insert these details. So let's see what the content is from batch processing status. I forgot the database name. Batch process status, is it? Let me recollect what the database is. Order processing status, sorry. Let's use order. Should be order processing status. Yeah, see, this is the one that I have already done, and let's delete it. But let's see the content. So we are going to store batch ID, batch date, which is defaulted to the current date. You don't need to insert it. So automatically the current timestamp will be maintained. And we are going to do is to insert total records, failed records, and success records. That's what we are going to do now. So let's go back. And after the logger, we are going to introduce insert, database insert. Let's drag and drop. So let's choose this database existing configuration, and let's insert into order processing status. So we are going to select only 3 columns: batch ID, total records, failed records, success records. So it's 4. So batch ID. Batch date we are going to ignore because it's going to be defaulted using current timestamp, and total records, failed records, success records. So these are the 4 fields that we are going to insert. So let us apply values. Let's copy this for simplicity. These are the parameters that we are going to use, and let's put colon in front of each parameter, and these are the ones that we are going to have it here. So we'll close, and we have to use each of this parameter. So batch ID colon, so let's say payload dot, you can see the details that are coming from the records in the context of this statistics of this batch job. You can choose batch job instance ID, which will be the MuleSoft ID, which is a correlation ID we have seen already, and total records, sorry, and total records will be payload dot total records. So automatically you can use the tooltip here. And next is failed records, so which is payload dot failed records. Sorry about that. Failed records. And finally, success records. Colon, payload. I have given success records, but actually the metrics instance contains successful records. That's okay. So we have completed now. So now it should insert the records. So let's go ahead and delete the existing one. So let's say delete from, let's delete it. So now let's see the select. So it has no records. Now let's go ahead and process this. Let's ensure that the application is restarted. So let's copy this order now and then put it in the input folder. And let's investigate what happens. So it's giving processed records total 11, successful 11, and failed records 0. So let's complete this. Let's come to this different perspective. And I don't see any records or errors. Let's go back and then run it. And you can see here you have the batch ID, which is a correlation ID. Batch date is it's giving the current date with a timestamp. It's always better to have it as a timestamp because you in a day you can process different batches, so you can keep track of the timestamp. Total records, failed record is 0 and successful record is 11. So this is working as expected. So now we are going to have a couple of more exploration to complete our understanding in this. So what happens when there is a failure? So we need to isolate the failed records and then should be able to process it later and correct it. So in order to do that, so I'm doing a slight manipulation in this data weave. So I'm going to play around with the quantity and then let me give incorrect quantity and then see how the system is behaving. So I'm introducing another field error. So in order to find out error quantity, we are trying to manipulate with the payload of 0 dot quantity by 2.0. So I'm deliberately making some manipulation so that it works only for the valid quantity, and then if you are trying to give invalid quantity, it will break, and then the broken record will be counted as invalid record, and then it will also impact the number of processed records. Let us see how this works. So let's restart it. Let's save it. And then let's wait for it to restart. Okay. So now how we are going to manipulate this data is, let's go to the demo, and then I have already done that. So if you look at it, one of the records with the order number 10009 contains quantity as USA, which doesn't make any sense because it should be a numeric value. And then when it's trying to manipulate, it will deliberately throw error, and then let's see how the system behaves. So you need to always not assume everything is going to be fine, and then you need to do this error handling. And there are so many things that could possibly go wrong. So I am just only giving the glimpse of how to simulate and then how to capture those error records. So let's go to the input and then we'll put it in processing. It should error out. At least one error record should be there, because you can see here you call the function division with a string. Expected is a number, so it's working as expected. So let's go back to the database and then select it. Now you can see here there are records that are processed. You can see here failed record is 1, and it impacted the success records very much because since we are aggregating for every order, the whole order is failed. So now this is the failed order, and let's remove it and then try to run it again. let's correct it here. Then we can say 6, save it, copy it, and then put it here. It's picked up. Now let's see how the data looks like. Now you can see here the total records 11 and success records 11. So we have now seen how to simulate the error, and then the system is able to understand and throw error when it happens. But the objective of this error is for us to know what to do with those failed records. Unless we capture it, we will not be able to correct that error and then process it. It will be lost forever. So there are two ways to do that. So one way is that you know very well, we can introduce a try catch, and then we can create exception handling, and then you can manually introduce some component there in order to put it in a file or somewhere. You can take it there for the later reference purpose. The other way is a system provided one, which is a very safe, you can trust. So what we are going to do is we are going to introduce another batch step here. So now we have a batch step in tandem back to back. So what we are going to leverage is, and if you double click batch step, you have an accept policy. If you click that, you can say all no failures and only failures. So we need to choose only failures. So the accept policy that says only failures would mean that it will process only failed records that are failed in the preceding step. So we have two steps. So whatever failed in the first batch step will be getting filtered over the second step, and then it will be processed. So it's a genuine and very fantastic way to do it systematically. So you can rename it as failed record processing, and here we can introduce logger, and just for differentiating purpose we will put some fancy text to understand whether it's working fine or not. So failed record equal to, we will put payload. So we will see if this is getting displayed or not when there is a failure. Let's save this, and the app is restarted. Let's do that. Now it's not going to work as expected. I'll tell you why I am doing it deliberately. So let's process this. It's processed, but if you come back, you will see the error that's happening, but you will not be able to see anywhere the one that we logged. We only see aggregated orders. We don't see failed records. This is very, very important for you to note why this failed record is not getting captured, although we have given accept policy only failures. The reason is, let's go to batch process, and here is an maximum failed record 0, which is a threshold for error records. So this field indicates to the MuleSoft that until upon how many errors are reached, then you need to go to the failed processing. So for us, even a single error matters a lot. So instead of 0, we are going to give 1. So 0 will not capture any records. So even if it is erroring out, it will just ignore and then it won't process it. So now we are giving failed records 1. As soon as you reach failed record 1, the failed record will get processed, and it will go to the logger, and then it will go also to the aggregator. And let's save this. Saved it. Let's wait for it to restart. It's restarted. Now let's go back and copy this order with one of the records with the error. And it got picked up. Let's observe this log now carefully, because As soon as there is an error, I want to see the failed records that are displayed here. And you can see here now, you can see this division symbol which we displayed. You can see failed records is logged, which means that the second batch step has been processed only for the failed records. You can see here the quantity is USA, which is invalid. So this is one of the smart technique where you can capture those failed records, and either you can use the failed records individually, or you want to collect all the 100 or 200 failed records together and then aggregate it, you can do that. And so literally you are only processing max 4 orders, but it won't go to so you can even give a max error 4, and then you can aggregate it. And now I have just logged it, but you can introduce file right here, and let's give instead of input we will put output. We will create a output folder, and let's give this as a file connector here. So this is the path. So output failed record.txt. You can add in one of the previous videos I explained how to add the timestamp so that when there are multiple records it doesn't get overwritten. You can follow that, but for demo purpose we can see if this payload is getting updated into the file. Let's save this. It's restarted. Now let's process this again. Let's copy it. Let's process it. It's completed, and the file write should have been successful for this failed record 1. Let's go to the output folder. There you see the failed records.txt. Let's see the content. And the failed record is not written as a CSV. So let's write as a content. So write payload as application JSON. Let's save this. And let's run it again. Let's delete it. Let's go to this file and then process it here. Let's put it in input folder. It's processed. Let's come to the output. Let's see. So there you see the JSON format of this failed record, which contains quantity USA. So this is how you can capture the failed records and then put it into the database, or whenever there is a file entry comes here, you can create a trigger, and then you can send out an email alert to the ops team. So you can do plenty of things. So it's very important to know how to make those triggers and how to preserve these data, and then you can leverage these facilities to use it to fulfill your requirements. So that is the end of the section where we have seen how batch process works, and then we have seen all the detail about the batch job, batch step, batch aggregator, and then how to check the failed records and how to persist the failed records. And also we have seen how to process individual records by writing into database. And also we have seen how to write the metrics of total of failed records and past records also into the database. So I think this gives a bird's eye view of what to do with batch job and how to design different features that are available provided by Mule 4. So hope you liked it and you enjoyed it, and hopefully you will get benefited out of this video. And if you felt this is useful, please hit thumbs up and subscribe my videos. Soon I will come up with more useful topics. Thanks for watching this video. Bye.